Good afternoon. I'm Arunabha Ghosh. I'm the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, our stellar panelists and special addressers, as well as all of those of you who've joined us on this Parishad, CEW Parishad webinar. Today is a special day because it marks just a week after the 5th anniversary of the launch of our first report on energy access. Way back in 2015, on the 29th of September, we launched at that time what would have been the results from what would have been the world's largest survey on energy access, in which we had covered 9,000 rural households across India in 6 states. At that time, the then Power Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, had come and launched that report and immediately took that report back to the ministry and started actioning on many of the recommendations that we had put forward. And we are deeply appreciative of the engagements that we've had with the Power Ministry ever since. In 2018, we launched the second version of the ACCESS survey, which then became the largest survey of its kind. It's like Indian elections. Every round becomes larger than the previous one. And we had a data set of more than 5 million data points, which again gave us a very deep insight on the kind of electricity, as well as cooking energy access that was being delivered to Indian households. Today, we are launching the next round, but we call it differently. We call it the Indian Residential Energy Survey, because it covers not just rural households, but urban households as well. Not just across 6 states, but 21 states across more than 150 districts. You will hear much more about this, and a representative sample at a nationwide level of nearly 15,000 households. Why do we do this? We do this because we are excited by the energy, pun intended, being put into delivering energy access into every household. But we are also interested to see how that access to energy is changing consumer behavior, is changing household aspirations, and of course, at a macroeconomic level, is changing the power system for the country. In the last decade, India has introduced electricity access to about 350 million people. When the Sustainable Development Goals were announced in 2015, India had the largest number of people without access to modern energy. And that story has changed in a matter of a few years. But as this changes, individual aspirations change. The appliance users change. And this is particularly now important given that we are also going through an economic crisis as a result of the pandemic, where we have to look at where will new consumer demand for appliances, for productive use of energy, etc., come from. It is with that intention in mind that we keep doing these regular exercises and make them larger in each round to make sure that we're able to provide objective information for policymakers and for technicians on the ground to be able to act accordingly. At CEW, we have been engaging on power and energy issues with the line ministries for many years, in addition to supporting and giving inputs for the Saubhagya and the Ujjwala schemes. We have worked with Niti Aayog on the Clean Cooking Energy Roadmap. We did the very first evaluation of the National Solar Mission. We were tasked by the Prime Minister's office to look at how big India could get on renewable energy way back in 2014, when the new big targets were announced. And we will continue to do that, both at the central level, but also at the state level. We have an office in Lucknow, where we are working with the UP Discoms on improving consumer engagement with the utilities and other activities. I don't want to take more time. My colleague, Shalu Agarwal, who's the lead author of this report, will give you an overview of the study. And after that, I will have the pleasure and the privilege to introduce our speakers. First, Mr. Sanjay Malhotra, and then Mr. Jay Panda. Shalu, over to you.
Thanks, Arunabha. I hope everyone can see my screen. Um, right. So Arunabha has very deftly, sorry, I think, just a second, please. Right. Arunabha, thanks for very deftly putting out the context for why we did this study. We do see around us that over the past decade, India has changed several changes. We have seen massive electrification drives. We are seeing changes in the supply situation. We're seeing changes in how people use electricity and consume it. Residential sector in the country, which accounts for a fourth of the country's power consumption, is growing fast, and it's the second fastest consumer category. And all of this mean that in a climate constrained world, India needs to up its efforts on the demand side management while meeting the needs of its people. And therefore, we conducted this survey, India Residential Energy Survey, to understand how people use electricity in their homes and how is the state of supply. It's a survey of 14,850 homes, a third of whom are urban. And it's spread across 21 states in the country, which account for 97% of the total population. We employed a multi-state stratified sampling like NSSO does, and we covered 152 districts and more than 1,800 villages and wards to finally reach around 15,000 households. This whole exercise spanned over a period of 300 days, where a team of 20 managers, 40 supervisors, and 154 enumerators conducted the survey in 11 Indian languages. Now, coming straight away to the findings, we find that India is just a few steps away from universal electrification. While 97% of Indian homes have electricity access, with even more in urban India, around 2.4% homes still do not have access to any electricity source. And most of these are in rural areas and a few north central states. UP alone accounts for a third of those who are still not electrified, and it's followed by Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, and Bihar. Now, this brings us to the question as to why is it that despite Saubhagya, a few households still remain unelectrified? And we find that inability to afford the grid electricity is the most cited reason by those who are not electrified. We also looked that most of these households, they are actually poor and they rely on labor activities. They live in kacha households, do not have any motorized vehicle, which explains why they may find the recurring electricity bills expensive or difficult to afford. Apart from that, we also find unavailability in the neighborhood as the second most cited issue, but mainly restricted to a few districts in Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, and UP. The findings highlight how we need more targeted efforts to electrify and identify and electrify the remaining households. But this should also be supplemented by ultra low tariffs for those who have very limited consumption so that they can sustain their electricity use to meet their basic energy needs. Now, next, let's talk about the supply situation. We find that an average Indian home receives 20.5 hours of power supply. Of course, the supply is better in urban areas where the average is 22 hours. And there is a wide variation across states, as you can see here in the graph, with Delhi, Kerala, and Gujarat leading the pack with near 24/7 supply. But rural households in certain northern states like Haryana, Bihar, UP, Assam, getting more than 6 hours of power cuts on a daily basis. The urban-rural divide is very conspicuous across all the states. And we understand that this is a static assessment, that this is where we are. So we also looked at how the situation is changing over time. And we find there's been a significant progress in the supply situation in 6 access states, where we have been going back to since 2015. And here, Bihar, Jharkhand, and UP have made the major progress, where the average supply increased from 9 hours in 2015 to nearly 16 to 18 hours in 2020, which is nearly a 200% increase. And it won't be surprising to know that commensurate to the improvements in the supply, we also noticed that the consumer satisfaction has been improving. In this access state, the rural satisfaction went up from 25% to 70%, which is nearly a 300% increase. Overall, at an all India level, we find that 77% households are satisfied. And it is in, certain households, certain states like Assam, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, and UP, where there's a further scope for improvement. And all of this highlights the need to sustain the momentum with which the country is progressing, which then brings me to the heart of the problem, which is whether discoms are recovering their dues, what's the state of metering, billing, and payments. Here also we find that nearly 93% of households have got functional meters. It's a mistake, the unsatisfied with the functional meters. And the improvements have been very significant in the access states, where rural metering rose from 53% to 85%. Here, the major gaps are concentrated in a few states, and Jharkhand and Madhya Pradesh somehow stand starkly, where nearly half of the rural households reported about having either dysfunctional or unmetered connection. On the billing front, we find that nearly 90% of Indian households are billed regularly. What this also means is nearly a tenth of households do not get bills on a regular basis or haven't got a bill at all. In fact, 7% of the rural grid users have not been billed even once. What this means is for the consumers that, it's often difficult to pay once the accumulated bills come in one go, which often can push them towards disconnection, but it also means the lost revenue for the discoms. Interestingly, during the COVID times, we all, the need for digital payments became heightened when many people couldn't go to the discom counters to pay. But before COVID struck the country, as per this survey, we find only 17% of the consumers were paying their bills digitally, and the rest prefer to pay their bills in cash. So all of this highlights that the need to leverage technology and innovative solutions to, of course, improve the metering and billing, but also facilitate payments for the consumers. This graph basically tracks how India has progressed on electricity access front, the share of households which use electricity as primary source of lighting. And we see in 1980s, when just 26% of Indian homes could use electricity as a primary source for lighting, we have moved significantly ahead. And over the past 2 decades, the efforts have been the most stark. So in the coming, what this also means is the electricity access has unlocked the consumer aspirations, and we see a significant rise in the ownership of appliances across the board. In fact, more than 20% Indian homes bought TVs and fans over the past decade. But the rising aspirations also imply more electricity consumption, which means more bills for the consumers, more subsidy burden, and more emissions for the country. Thus, in the coming decade, the role of energy efficiency is going to be immensely crucial. Indian government has made several efforts in this direction. And we do find that because of Ujala, which was launched in 2015, Indian homes have literally leapfrogged to LED bulbs now. It's one of its kind of progress in the world today. Nearly 88% of Indian homes currently have LED lamp or tube, at least one of them. And of the total lighting stock, we find that nearly 2/3 is now LED based. This graph shows that again, we have made progress across most states, but there are still states like Jharkhand, MP, and Chhattisgarh where nearly 1/3 of the households do not have LEDs. And the major reason for that is lack of awareness and relatively higher cost for the LED bulbs. Coming to the other appliances, we find a mixed result. We see that Indian homes prefer to use efficient air conditioners, but inefficient fans. In case of ACs, we find nearly 1/4 of AC stock is star rated, but because some of the households didn't know about the labels also. But in case of fans, we find only 8% of the users are even aware about availability of star labeled fans, and only 3% claim to have star rated fans. And this is particularly because of the difference in the labeling regime. ACs have a mandatory labels, fans do not have one. The BE has plans to make labeling mandatory for the ceiling fans from January 2022. But this would, of course, raise concerns about the fact that most of the fans market is predominated by unorganized sector. And many of the manufacturers are often unaware about these labeling schemes and find it difficult to source the components at a cheaper price and are sensitive about consumers' preferences. And this highlights a need for interventions to support MSMEs as we go forward, but also interventions to make appliances affordable. We do find that most households rank appliance cost as a key, is a most important factor while they're purchasing new appliances. And this is followed by other factors like brand popularity and also energy savings. And finally, we also need interventions around awareness campaigns. And this is because we find that just a fourth of Indian homes are aware about the BE star label. Now, the success of the star labeling scheme depends on consumer awareness about these labels. While the consumer awareness is higher among the urban households, richer households in districts and states which have more of such populations, the rural households or those living in smaller towns are still, they still need more support on this front. And thus, the coming future efforts need to focus on these states and areas where there'll be more demand for such appliances. And we need to find strategies such that we can mainstream energy efficiency and embed it in the Indian homes. And this brings me to the end of my presentation. These are the two studies that we'll be launching today: the state of electricity access in India and awareness and adoption of energy efficiency in Indian homes, which you can access online on CEW's website. And I would like to end by acknowledging my fellow researchers who were behind this whole effort, as well as thank all the supporters, the partners, and the reviewers for this study. Thank you.
Thank you, Shadu. You can stop sharing your screen now. Thanks for the presentation. Let me get straight to Mr. Sanjay Malhotra. He is the Additional Secretary in the Ministry of Power. He has experience more than 30 years in the central and state governments, as well as in UNIDO, working in various areas, including finance, taxation, e-governance, mines, and more than 6 years of experience in the power sector. Mr. Malhotra, also thank you for the time you've given to let the team brief you about this work when the results came out. We're deeply grateful to you for coming online for this webinar to offer your thoughts. I request you to deliver your special address.
Thank you, Arunabha, and a very good afternoon to all the speakers, Mr. Panda, and dear friends. It is indeed my pleasure to be here on the launch of the reports. As mentioned, I had been through the reports, and the CEW team had taken me through the reports in one of the online sessions that I had earlier. And I must congratulate CEW and the whole team for coming out with this report. It gives some very useful insights to us, both in terms of access, quality, metering, billing issues, energy efficiency related issues. And I'm sure, this will help us in making our policy interventions. I'm very happy with this report, and I'm sure you will continue to do this work. Some comments, first of all, on the report, and that is, first is that 97%, only 2.4% as per your report, households do not have an electricity connection. So, and of them also 60% don't have one because they can't afford it. While that is certainly a matter of concern, it's only about 1% which do not have electricity because of non-economic reasons. And so the supply is there. So that is a good That's a good sign, that's a good signal, and it also validates the fact that Sobhagya has actually helped in increasing access of electricity to the public with about 27 million connections given in the last 3 years under Sobhagya. It's no wonder, that your survey amply brings that out. Secondly, even in terms of access, we find that access has actually improved, and it has improved drastically from about 9 or 10 hours in certain states to an average of more than 20 hours in the whole of the country. Obviously, it could not have been possible without the contribution of these states like UP and Bihar, where there used to be frequent cuts and, in fact, load shedding. So the days of load shedding are still not behind us, but I am quite confident that with the kind of progress that has been made in the last 5 years, the days are not very far away that all the households will will have will have 24/7 literally power. Third, again, very encouraging sign is that 77% Indian households are satisfied with electricity. I thought, I mean, that is a surprising figure because uh, we have all, over the years, in 30 years in public service, the demands, the expectations have increased, and well, why not? Rightly so. So, if despite the increase in expectations, 77% of Indian households are satisfied with electricity, I think it is a very high number. Uh, and I would attribute part of it, I mean, quite a lot of it, to the lower expectations of the public. So there is I feel a lot of work to be done on that front. Uh, but let me tell you, it is not an easy job because I have been secretary. I was secretary of energy in Rajasthan, and we would have trainees. They would come to us, young probationers. They would come, and right after their district trainings, and they would tell me that, sir, we go to these rural areas and we have the campaigns for complaint redressals and all, and we find that the maximum number of complaints are related to electricity. So I told them, well, it is not a surprise because there is not a single department which touches the lives of the public to such an extent as the electricity department. You name one department which touches the lives, roads, water, you name it, railways, none at all. Because this is now with universal access, almost everyone. Pani is not there, with everyone. Uh, and then it is 24/7, 20 hours, but you need it 24/7. Water, is maybe morning, evening, some places even, once in 2 days and so on. So this is something which touches the lives of everyone 24/7. No doubt, if there are going to be a lot of complaints, maximum number of complaints, but I'm very pleased that the satisfaction level is 77%, is very high, is according to me, very high given the state of affairs. And so, like, Arunava said, that, I mean, he has power cut every day in Gurgaon, and which is a surprise to me, because there are places in the country And I can say, say I was in Jaipur prior to this. I mean, we didn't have, a daily cut. Even in, some of the badly managed areas, we didn't have. And being near the capital, we recognize the fact that there is a lot of scope of work for us, despite your findings. And 23% being unsatisfied is not a small number. It's a huge number, running into, crores of people. And so that's why now the focus of the ministry, with excess more or less being there, few lakh consumers not having electricity. The focus really now is on reliable supply, on 24 supply. It is on SAFI, those who understand the terms, the SAFI, SADI, duration, and interval, the duration of interruptions and the frequency of interruptions, and the consumer services and the consumer experience. So our focus now really is on that. You would be happy, again, to note that, we are in terms of EODB rankings, in terms of getting access to electricity. India is number 22, and which again, but that is because the way it is done, it is only actually Delhi and Bombay, which is considered in these rankings. And so despite that, our focus really now is on quality of supply, you would have seen, and the consumer satisfaction, how to get it up to, the high 90s, from the 77% that you report. And for that, you would have noticed, we came out with a draft rules for for improving consumer satisfaction. We are also setting up a committee now to, sorry about that, a committee to
Mr. Malhotra, can you hear us? Your screen is frozen. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, the network dropped.
Yeah.
So
I can hear
I
you.
was saying that we have set up a committee to prepare an index, a framework for electricity related matters and ease of living for electricity, for all the interface, all the touch points that the energy department or the power discoms, distribution companies have with the consumers, and then try to rank the distribution licensees across the country. Hopefully, it will spur the not so well performing distribution utilities to improve performance. The second thing that we are concentrating on, and which is essential for improving quality, for improving consumer satisfaction, for improving access, is the viability and the sustainability of the distribution companies, which is a big issue, as all of you are aware. Because with excess and more power, all of you would be aware, we are losing the discoms on an average. The state-run distribution companies on an average lose almost a rupee per unit of energy sold. So if that is going to be the state of affairs, then obviously there is something, energy, electricity, being such a big enabler, uh, that we need to actually do something about improving the finances, the wherewithal of the distribution companies to be able to keep providing electricity to the people, who cannot afford it. And and over there, I think your council. This is again, an area I think, the council needs to, because these are enablers. Because I mean, unless the discoms are sustainable, whatever we may do, so we will not be able to achieve quality supply of power. And so the ministry is taking quite a few steps, which you would have read in the papers. There is the tariff policy. There are the reforms that we are talking about, through the Electricity Act. And you would have also read about the UTs, the Union Territories, being the distribution utilities being privatized. So in the country. So these are all the steps that the ministry is taking. I'm quite confident that with improvement in the living standards, with the improvement in the afford in the, with the paying capacity, as India grows, and the consumption of electricity increase, and that's going to increase because standards are going to improve, electricity appliances are going to come in, electric vehicles is a big future. So if all the energy of the electrical vehicles come into the electricity sector, electric cooking is one area which has tremendous scope. So you have not been able to tap. So I'm pretty confident that and the marginal cost to supply actually is not very high with supply actually being in excess. One of the reasons why these distribution companies are actually losing is because they have over capacities, and so they are paying the fixed charges for those capacities which have been built, but there are no buyers, there are no takers for it. So that is one of, so hopefully with this coming up, affordability improving and the tariffs going down, because now with solar and all, you have seen how the tariffs have come down. I am pretty confident that that there are good days for the electricity sector, for the power sector to come. Let me thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to interact with you, and I'm sure CEW would continue to keep partnering with the ministry and its organizations and giving its inputs in various policy interventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malhotra. 3 points that I took away from your intervention. One, 77% is high, but 23% lack of satisfaction is also high. And in CWR, our motto is raise the bar. In the electricity markets, the bus bar is a very important component of electricity systems. So we recognize that the bar has to rise, and you coming up front and saying that is very critical. The second point that you made about this ranking of distribution companies is, I think, extremely important, which is why in 2015, we had done this multi-dimensional analysis survey, because it's not just sufficient to ask if the wire is coming to your house. It is how many hours of power are you getting? How many days of blackout is happening? What is the voltage at which you're getting the power supply? It is this multi-dimensional that creates that quality of life that you were referring to. But the third point was the most important, I believe, because it is ultimately dependent on the financial health of the electricity system. And in 2 words, the political economy of managing the power sector, which is one of the, the third largest or fourth largest power system in the world, is something that we all have to collectively solve for, not just government, not just the consumer, not just research institutions like ours, or the generating companies. 4 years ago, my colleague Karthik Ganeshan and I and with some others, we had written a book called Energizing India, in which we had outlined 4 different energy transitions that India would go through by the time it would be a 100-year-old independent nation. The first energy transition is kind of done, which was the move from traditional energy to modern energy, barring some of the gaps that still remain. But it is that second, the shift in patterns of energy demand. It is that third, the deeper integration of India into global energy markets. And it is that fourth, to be able to grow our energy system and grow our economy and grow jobs while the carbon budget keeps shrinking. These are the ways in which why the next decade, having achieved the first transition, the next decade or the next 2 decades are going to be particularly critical. I'm therefore extremely happy and extremely grateful to Mr. Jay Panda for agreeing to be our other guest to deliver a special address. Mr. Panda is currently the National Vice President of the BJP, four-time Member of Parliament, both in the upper and in the lower houses. Uh, he has convened the Young Parliamentarians Forum and has been associated with the India-US Forum of Parliamentarians since 2001, was its chairman for 15 years. He was awarded the Bharat Asmita National Award for Best Parliamentary Practices. Um, and since its inception in 2007, Mr. Panda has been associated with something called Citizens Alliance Against Malnutrition, an advocacy group, including parliamentarians across parties and other civil society people, as well as other organizations. But why I'm particularly delighted is because if those of you, and I would assume that's all of you who've read his writings, Mr. Panda's commentary on national governance issues spans a range of issues, from whether it's universal basic income to governance to energy and so forth. And as a people's representative, I wanted to pose those two words to Mr. Panda. How do we solve for the political economy of the electricity system? Because as Mr. Malhotra was mentioning, electricity and energy is that one thing that is touching every other aspect of our lives and livelihoods. Um, and if we can solve for that, the way opportunities open up. Just 6 weeks ago, Minister Goyal launched our latest initiative called Powering Livelihoods, a $3 million program to help rural startups um, use distributed energy for productive enterprises. In a few weeks from now, the Central Electricity Authority will launch a portal that we have developed for them, which will give real-time information from every single of what will help solve for this political economy, so that the 23% shrinks to maybe 2%, so that the DISCOM balance sheets improve, and so that the economy and the consumer get onto a more even keel. Mr. Panda, thank you very much for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you. That has been prepared, but also a bird's eye view of the landscape that we are faced with and the policy challenges and decisions that are being taken. I would like to thank Shalu Agarwal and your colleagues who have put together this outstanding report. I had a chance to go through it before our video conference today, and I echo Mr. Malhotra's comments about its usefulness. It is extremely illuminating, and I'll come to that in a minute. My regards to all the other distinguished speakers. I do apologize. I have a time constraint, and I will not be able to stay for most of the discussion afterwards, but perhaps I can circle back and pick up some of the feedback that comes through from this. So before coming to the report, if we look at the macro situation, and both Arunabha, you and Mr. Malhotra referred to it, as well as Shalu Agarwal, is that the big picture is, over the last couple of decades, we have had a phenomenal transformation with well over 500 million Indians having been brought out of darkness. The figure is probably something approaching 800 million Indians. So if you look at that macro picture over 2 decades, that is a transformation on a scale that is extremely, extremely rare. In that time frame and for that size, Perhaps China would be the only other nation that has achieved anything like this. But the more gratifying thing is that the trajectory has picked up. While there has been this improving trajectory, what we have seen in the recent past, in the past 5 years or so, is the proverbial hockey stick curve, where that gradual improvement has seen an extremely sharp uptick. And this didn't happen accidentally. The baton had been handed over from different administrations over the past 2 decades, but in the past 5 or so years, with specific thrusts on programs, the one that this report refers to extensively, Saubhagya, the Pradhan Mantri Sahaj Bijli Har Ghar Yojana. But in addition to that, Ujjwala scheme and several other schemes have given a thrust, which is a very distinct shifting of gears. And you see that in the numbers. You see that in the numbers that have the numbers of homes that have got electrified. You see that in some of the numbers that Mr. Malhotra was referring to from the report about satisfaction levels, about the billing levels, and about the number of hours that we get electricity. So there's an extremely noticeable and significant shift. And we have come to at least one definition of universal electrification. You can have 2 or 3 definitions. And this one definition is those who want it. And as has been referred to, this is an economic issue. Perhaps a percent or so of the population has an economic barrier to not availing of this connection, but otherwise everybody else willing has it. Now, that doesn't necessarily meet all the other definitions of what is universal electrification. So, I mean, if you look at the UN as the UN goals, SDG goals, you know, it talks about access to affordable, reliable, sustainable modern energy. Now, if you use the sustainable criteria, many of the advanced economies also haven't achieved the UN goals, because with very few exceptions, not that many of the big Western economies have achieved a tipping point in terms of their basket of sources of energy being sustainable. But clearly, there are things that we still need to achieve. But I think it is worthwhile spending a moment to recognize that great things have been achieved over the past 2 decades, and particularly over the past 5 years. And if we don't do that, we would be doing a disservice to the efforts, both from government at the national and state levels, and from institutions like CEEW and many others to make this happen. So I want to refer to this as a sort of a eureka moment. And the reason for that is, for people like us, those of us who are participating in this, we've had different similar eureka moments in seeing India finally get there. A few short years ago, we finally started seeing world-class airports, from having some of the most bedraggled examples from anywhere in the world. Today, over the last few years, middle-class Indians who have a vehicle are able to travel on expressways that are second to none anywhere. Now, I, for example, from being from Odisha, am amazed how many people in just the last 3 or 4 years choose to drive all the way from Odisha to Delhi, which was unthinkable just a decade or 2 ago, and certainly when I was growing up. I refer to this is because these are similar aspects of infrastructure where the middle class and those who avail of these services much more have had such eureka moments. But electricity, being the most fundamental infrastructure, the most fundamental service in a modern economy, hasn't reached that point yet, but is just going through that phase. When we have this 97% of population having access, we are getting there. Now, as the report acknowledges, and as Mr. Malhotra and you were talking about, there are indeed other hurdles, other milestones that we need to achieve. Clearly, the entire ecosystem of this electricity delivery to all these hundreds of millions of consumers is not going to be viable if the distribution companies are not viable. But I see the glass as half full rather than as half empty, because the fact that it is becoming accepted that people pay for electricity. Now, maybe subsidized electricity, the figure of 1 rupee subsidy per unit was referred to, maybe subsidized, but even subsidized electricity was not acceptable as something that needs to be paid for most of our republic's lifetime till now. I think that's a significant corner that we have turned. Now, this will be addressed as disposable incomes rise and as many other developments take place. But I want to refer to something here that I think is important. So what we did in the past was we interfered with the pricing mechanism. We interfered with market mechanisms. And as a result of that, there was a whole socio-cultural aspect of what electricity is and whether it's a fundamental right, whether you should pay for it. And that, to my mind, was the root of the problem. Now, once we have a social acceptance that just like a telecom recharge, SIM card recharge, electricity is something that you need to pay for, and that it should be commensurate with your ability to pay, where, of course, we need to have higher living standards and earnings, we have indeed turned a very major corner. So what, if you look at classical economics, if you have to interfere in the economics of delivery of something very basic, like electricity, then rather than interfering with the pricing mechanism, it's much better to have a direct subsidy to the consumer. And this is something that has been happening in across the spectrum in India with the deployment of the JAM trilogy, with the deployment of biometrics, so the Aadhaar system. I mean, if you just think about it, just in the last 6 months, with hundreds of millions of Indian citizens going through distress, getting cash transfers directly into their hands through these new modern technologies, was a wonderful example of that transition that is taking place, that instead of subsidizing the goods, you let the goods have a price discovery mechanism, or the services have a price discovery mechanism, and then you bypass the viability gap, if you will, of individual customers to buy that by directly giving them that. So this is, we have reached a eureka moment. That's the point I was trying to make. And I think the balance of the economic hurdle, it won't be easy, but I can certainly see the light at the end of the tunnel as to how it can be solved in the days going forward. Now, since we are talking about the political economy here, I'm going to take the liberty of digressing slightly, just for a short while, into politics. Let me say this. Now, as a public representative, having been on the ground for 20 years, over the past decade, when we hadn't reached 97%, but we had reached maybe 75% or 80% penetration of electricity connection into villages, it shocked me to see that the people that were left out were not necessarily only the poorest people in every village. It was also the poorest or the most backward or somehow the most disadvantaged community. So for example, in every village, you would have different parts of the village, and some parts of a village which were predominantly populated by people from a backward community, people from underprivileged sections of society. Now, they might have members who were capable of paying for the electricity, but that section of the village was the last to be electrified, and they would not get connected. So the point I'm trying to make is, this is a social cohesion issue as well. Now, we have, the reason I'm referring to this in my reference to politics is because we have tried many different ways to address such social cohesiveness issues by having special plans for particular communities, by having special subsidies for different sections of the population. But the big difference now, and this I think is working, is the Prime Minister's stress on the idea that we don't have to go that route. We can provide services to everybody, irrespective of your caste, creed, religion, economic strata, etc. And therefore, the Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas motto, I think, has been on test. Now, maybe you can do it in some smaller set of services or infrastructure. Can you do it for electricity? And I think this report is a fantastic vindication of the idea that even on this scale, even going down to the last household, you can provide blanket coverage to virtually every household. And this addresses social issues, social schisms, social lack of access, and not just economic lack of access. So I think this is a great vindication of that we can indeed have this approach of universal provision. And this, by the way, this is not just for the Saubhagya scheme. If you look at the Ujjwala scheme, it's the same thing. It aims to reach every Indian, every rural household, and benefits hundreds of millions of women, irrespective of their socioeconomic or at least social background. So I think this is a political philosophy that has been on test, and it is on test on many other reforms that are happening today, many long pending reforms. But I think the single biggest test is in providing universal access to electricity. Let me round up and come to a conclusion. We've seen these very dramatic changes over the past few decades, in the past few years, in terms of access, in terms of hours of availability, in terms of satisfaction levels. But as has been pointed out, we haven't reached the optimal level yet. I just want to emphasize that it is indeed a moment to take stock and take some satisfaction in getting in where we have reached. And I think the lay of the land has been adequately and very effectively pointed out by Mr. Malhotra, that I don't need to add that much more to it. I look forward to more such reports from CEEW. I look forward to feedback from the discussion that will continue at this session today, because not everyone has the answers. It's wonderful to have this feedback system to get not just vindication, but to point out where further hurdles are perhaps not being negotiated efficiently enough, and what we can do to speed up this process. So once again, compliments Arunabha and the rest of your team at CEW for a very, very illuminating, very useful report. And as I said, I look forward to more such occasions in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Panda. Your address did exactly what I had hoped and requested you to do by connecting the on-ground reality, the feedback that from consumers that you were encountering, but also then connecting it to the broader sort of structural changes happening in the economy in terms of different sectors of infrastructure and our engagement with them, our expectation of what a road should look like and what an airport should look like, and now what the power system in our homes should look like and what the power system overall should look like. By also connecting it to the socioeconomic dimension, you've brought to light something that we brought out in June this year in a report called Jobs, Growth and Sustainability, a new social contract for India's recovery, where we again emphasize that this emphasis on sustainable infrastructure can then drive new forms of growth for people who, or sections of society that get left out, and also create more local jobs. And whether it's in powering up rural enterprises or whether it's in a more distributed energy infrastructure in the cities, or it's in transforming the mobility systems and so forth. And it is this need to keep connecting these dots that's critical. If less than 700 crore can solarize every single primary health center in the country, which means that when we bring out the vaccines, they will have an ability to be stored in the furthest corners of the country. So these are the opportunities that also come piggybacking on this transformation that is unfolding right in front of our eyes. So I want to once again thank both Mr. Malhotra for your time, for your engagement in the past few weeks and today. And Mr. Panda, thank you for going through this report and giving us that broader connection of where the report fits in how India is changing. I will now hand over to my senior colleague Karthik Ganeshan, who leads our power sector team, to moderate the panel comprising Nirika Holkar from Godrej and Boyce Manufacturing Company, the Executive Director, Sangeeta Matthew, Program Lead of the Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy, Rama Bijapurkar, Chairperson of the People's Research on India's Consumer Economy, and Mr. Shantanu Dikshit from the Prayas Energy Group. Thank you all as well from my side for engaging, because it is now the future of India's electricity aspirations that I would like the panel to focus on. And once again, I'll sign off too. Thank you so much to Mr. Malhotra and Mr. Panda. Over to you, Karthik.
Thank you, Arunabha, and thank you, Mr. Malhotra and Mr. Panda. Mr. Garnayak, may I request you also to switch on your camera, please? Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Shantanu, would you be able to put on your camera as well? Thank you. Got it. Perfect. Great. Mr. Garnayak, welcome to the panel as well. I think Arunabha, given that we had originally Mr. Saurabh Kumar there, we didn't have you there in Arunabha's list, but thank you so much for joining, Mr. Garnayak. Mr. Garnayak is the Executive Director and Business Unit Head at Energy Efficiency Services Limited. And he's had more than 25 years of experience in the energy efficiency business and has led some key programs, flagship programs like the PAT scheme and the Standards Enabling Program on BE's part. And he's well published in the academic world as well. So, and I think the rest of the speakers, Arunabha is briefly introduced. We have a little over an hour with us to sort of deliberate between the five of us and perhaps take some questions on from anything that might come up. So I'll start basically where we left off in the previous set of discussions. And Shantanu, I'll head straight to you on this. So you saw that about 2.54% of the households are still unelectrified, Shantanu. So to sort of cover that gap, I mean, I know Prayas, of course, has been advocating for different forms of electricity provision from the distribution companies, different business models. How do you believe? What do you think is the best way to sort of go about reaching 2.4%? I mean, it's not a large number in percentage terms, but when it comes to household numbers, it can be a significant burden, especially given the states where it is at. Do you feel, along with the 2.4%, we need to rethink the way we are electrifying and supplying electricity to some of the poorest in the country?
Yes, thank you, Karthik. Before I come to your question, I would like to compliment CEW for conducting this survey, which is very helpful in terms of really getting a feedback from the ground, how people are experiencing electricity services. So it's a very welcome step. And now coming to your question, Karthik, yes, definitely 2.5% is may not be a big number in terms of percentage, but in terms of household, this is certainly a very significant number, and we as a country need to do something about it. I was going through some highlights of your report, and there are a variety of reasons given by respondents for not having electricity connection, and that fall within this 2.5%. Some people are saying that they can't afford it. Some people are saying there is not enough infrastructure. Some people are really wary about very high bills that they might get. So I think we really need to go on a case by case basis and have different tailor-made solutions for each of these challenges or each of these issues. For example, if we are able to really improve quality of metering and billing by providing either prepaid meters or some kind of different innovative metering options, then that will help build trust amongst these communities that, okay, they will not get any excessive bills, they will have greater confidence and then willingness to take connection. That could be one approach which might be applicable for certain set of consumers. Those who really cannot afford it, we again need to think in terms of very low tariff for what is called typically as below poverty line tariff, which could be just few tens of rupees a month, or even in certain cases, as former Power Secretary Mr. Ajay Shankar had suggested, just considering giving really 1 unit per day as a merit good and at a very, very low tariff or even free tariff for these really deserving consumers. But that is intricately linked with the need to really rationalize overall subsidy structure. Then only we'll be able to afford this kind of ultra low tariff or supply to these consumers. On one hand saying that we want to subsidize even consumers with 200 units per month, and then again hoping to provide subsidy to even 1 unit per month per day as a merit good. I think there will be inherent financial limitation to that approach. Third thing is another reason that come out of your survey is there is lack of infrastructure. So if these households are really far too away from the grid, it's difficult to reach centralized grid to them, then we need to obviously think of off-grid solutions. So I think it will be a combination of these measures through which we can actually target this 2.5% households, and we definitely need to have such a sort of tailor-made approach. So I will stop with this sort of
So
suggestion.
I'll just follow up with another question, Shantanu. I mean, Prayas runs, multiple initiatives to monitor quality of supply and consumption at household levels as well, the ESMI and the EMARC. And when we presented some of the numbers regarding the supply hours, Mr. Malhotra initially was like, some of this seems out of line with what we're hearing from the discoms when it comes to, the level of supply that they're actually, having at the feeder level. So seeing the data that, you have, right, that you're monitoring in your own systems, what do you think can sort of explain this disparity between, what the discoms are claiming versus what people are actually experiencing on the ground?
I think discoms have very recently started giving attention to quality of supply and reducing interruptions. I think that is, to be very frank, a very recent phenomena. We are observing that in last couple of years. Before that, primary objective of discoms was to ensure that at least somehow keep feeder charged and ensure that they are able to recover some part of tariff. So emphasis on quality of supply is a recent phenomena, which is welcome. I think we need to really take advantage of low cost technologies that are now very easily available, the kind of electricity supply monitoring initiative that you mentioned. And maybe some people are surprised to see that even areas or households close to Delhi are experiencing one interruption per day. But if you look at the data that is available on our portal, that watchyourpower.org, for last 3-4 years, there are so many locations in urban cities, in large mega cities, where you find that per month interruptions are close to 40, 50, 60 interruptions per day, per month that are experienced. So we need to have more emphasis on monitoring quality of supply using technology at the consumer end, not just at the feeder level, because the sub distribution system or distribution system also needs a significant upgradation and fixing. So one is to have emphasis on technological monitoring. Second is, in the last 20 years of existence of regulatory commissions, I have hardly come across any regulatory proceedings which is solely focusing on quality of supply. So I think there is urgent need that regulatory commissions start focusing on quality of supply and not just on addressing tariff related issues. There need to be transparent monitoring of standards of performance, supply code, have a public process, have some kind of public consultation process, which will start giving more attention to quality of supply and make distribution companies more accountable. So I think these are some of the urgent steps that are required. Otherwise, the kind of access that we have managed to create, there is a danger that we may not be able to sustain even that kind of connections.
Right. We'll of course come back to you, but one of the points that Shantanu has raised, only 6% of the households that we interviewed in the preceding 6 months had actually registered a complaint pertaining to faulty supply. So despite the fact that it's prevalent, right, we find that many households don't actually take that all important step of making a complaint about the poor service levels where they are. We'll come back to the discussion, Shantanu, when we're discussing consumer rights later. Mr. Garnaik, I'd like to maybe turn the focus to you. So first of all, congratulations to you and the people at ESL and BE, because one of the things that's coming out from the survey is that, well, our mission to sort of ensure that lighting in India is efficient is a big success. I think if you go to cities across the world, you'll find that, still, old lamps, and old fittings and everything still sort of persists, primarily because, of course, legacy infrastructure is much harder to change, whereas, we were doing a lot of new procurement, and as a result we've managed to drive it. But nevertheless, I think the numbers are phenomenal. 88% of the households owning LED lights, and a big ownership of these efficient devices. But that said, every time we hear either from Mr. Saurabh Kumar or from the Power Ministry, we find that the example that is always given is of the bulbs and the the bulk procurement. And we know that this is a business model that is sort of maybe seeing some limits in the way that it can sort of maybe help penetration for other appliances. So what do you feel are BE's approaches, or maybe for that matter ESL's approaches, right, to enabling this kind of rapid rollout? Right, in a period of 4-5 years we saw this rollout for bulbs. how can we do this in the case of key appliances like fans and air conditioners, which are going to be the big next set of consuming devices?
Thank you, Mr. Ganesan, and all my co-panelists here. Thanks for the opportunity given to me. Let me first congratulate and compliment to the entire team of yours who came out with a very good findings through your survey, through your research work, and giving a very good insight of the energy usage pattern at the ground level, the satisfactory level, and how it has actually touched upon the socio-economic index of the country. You highlighted about one point, and which is linked to your question here. So one thing is that the energy efficiency is a paramount importance. It has its own importance, and which have been demonstrated ever since the Energy Conservation Act came into place, and there have been a lot of initiatives either by BE or either by the state level or maybe in the organizations like us. Yes, I fully agree with your point that lighting has been a phenomenal success, and the kind of demand aggregation we did, we went for the economy of scale principle, the bulk procurement principle, created the kind of manufacturing preparedness in the country. That has been a success, and what we saw is a dropping in the price, and the price crashed down from about, say, $5 in 2015 or 16 to right now less than $1 in today's scenario. So that has actually created a great impact in accessing to this technology by the common people. But that has also come out with a kind of challenge to us. We have only touched to the urban areas and to the institutional consumers per se. If I'm not wrong, the rural areas are still, they have the opportunity, or there is a potential, even in the lighting sector, to go out to the rural consumers. And that is why a few months back, you may have seen some of the news articles where ESL is planning to take it to the rural areas with a new business proposition, because even a 50 rupees or 40 rupees is very large as far as the rural consumer is concerned, where he's getting an incandescent bulb maybe in the 15 rupees, or maybe a CFL, or maybe with a that, or 40 or 50 rupees. So in that scenario, it does not make any sense unless otherwise there is a new financial instruments attached to it. What I mean to say here, that we are thinking how to bring that gap, make that affordable with that the consumer with that 15 rupees, at the same time bridge that gap of 40 rupees by through some. So that's not from the point of subsidy. We are against any kind of subsidy mechanism here. So what we are deciding right now here is that how we can bring the carbon financing to it. So with an approach of the CDM mechanism, with the UNFCCC protocol, probably that can be one of the solutions which can make our rural consumers affordable as far as lighting is concerned. We touched upon 360 million numbers, very quick time, in 4 to 5 years time. And the industry has done itself its own way. Apart from that, not only the bulbs, it has also touched upon the LED tube lights and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, the market is still there, and we want to capture that. Coming to your next point, which you highlighted, why this mechanism or the approach is not adopted in other appliances, particularly the ceiling fans, which is really an energy guzzler, the way the numbers are being used, and the usage hours are concerned. At the same time, the air conditioners, which itself is again a very, very energy guzzler, as you want, we know all these things. Let me come to the air conditioner first. Nevertheless, we also try to adopt the same economy of scale principle in the air conditioner program. Till now, we have gone through in deploying more than 200,000 numbers of air conditioner deployment. But the recent intervention, what we did, we came out with a program, what we call it as a super efficient air conditioner program, where we targeted to go for a much higher EER level, that is the efficiency value, which Bureau of Energy Efficiency stipulates. The average 5-star level, if you just see, it's somewhere about 4.5 or 4.6. But we went for defining a product with the EER value, typically it is IS EER value of 5.4, which is precisely 20% more than the best available product or the average 5-star product in the country. So in that way, we went for a public procurement, adopted that, and we got a good pricing for that. I think 39,900 was the price including of all taxes and all the warranty obligations with some extended warranty obligations and all these things. But nevertheless, we could not reach out to it to the common consumer. That means the first principle of getting a good price out of the economy of scale, that worked. Then why we could not deploy it? The reason was that we missed two important seasons ever since it was launched. It was launched in 2019, and because of the civil, election code of conduct and all, we could not launch it. And this year we missed the thing because of the COVID situation. But nevertheless, this has given a kind of confidence to us that the manufacturers are prepared to give this kind of product to us. We can get a better competitive price if we go with a higher number of things. And we have already created a pipeline of more than 60,000, 70,000 numbers. So that means that is there. So that means this, what it is exactly requires, it requires a very good, robust mechanism of distribution channel. Because the LED bulb one, that actually was successful because we adopted through a robust mechanism of distribution channels and awareness creation. At the same time, because of a high-end product like AC, we have to have that kind of distribution systems if at all we are targeting to a retail consumers or a common consumers. Coming to the fan side, yes, we are coming out with a program on the ceiling fans very soon. Most precisely, this was actually impacted by the star labeling program of Bureau of Energy Efficiency. As highlighted in your report also, it says that this particular program was not in the mandatory zone. It is a voluntary program, and coming out with a very unorganized sector, it has its own challenges. That is why the star rating products could not go into that. We are now coming out with a utility-based DSM program, and we are targeting the 3 states, Telangana, Odisha, and Jharkhand, where we have engaged with the concerned distribution companies there, electricity distribution companies there, to come out with the utility-based DSM program, which will give us a package. Package means lighting, fan, and air conditioners to the rural consumers, and this will be taken as an approval process from the Electricity Regulatory Board, so that the benefit what the DISCOM will get in terms of peak demand reduction, that benefit in translating into the monetary term will be passed on to the consumers. So that kind of, I think, a subsidy, some kind of, you can term it as a subsidy or an incentive that will be arrived from that. And ESL will be the sole, agency to invest in this entire program. The on-bill financing model, which all these people may be aware of, that has been quite successful in our LED program. But because of this crash down, reduction in the price, that particular mechanism was not, accepted or not practiced by the consumers. But yes, on-bill financing model with the involvement of the distribution companies would be one of the financial mechanism to actually address this issue. But yes, ESL is working on this principle, and we will be seeing this kind of rollout of this kind of programs on the Ujala things in the next coming year.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Garnaik. So I'll move to Sangeeta right now. Sangeeta, Shantanu, of course, was known to most people here because, he leads Prayas, which is an organization that is very well known. I'll just, in the interest of ensuring that that our participants know the rest of the panelists, I just want to quickly introduce Sangeeta to everyone. Sangeeta is a program lead at the Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy, ACCESS, one of the few organizations that is exclusively focusing on energy efficiency and doing a very good job at it. And they were one of the reviewers for our study as well. So thank you, Sangeeta and team. And Sangeeta, of course, focuses a lot on this publication of the State Energy Efficiency Index. So she's very clued into what states are doing to promote energy efficiency there, and is also working on the super efficient appliances that Mr. Garnaik has talked about. So Sangeeta, as a neutral, as an outside observer, right, obviously not representing EESL or BE, so you can speak your mind. What is your sense of why we've not managed to sort of scale up the interest in appliances like fans and air conditioners? And and Mr. Garnaik talked about the on-bill financing, and there's been a lot of talk going on about this, even in a in a relatively urbanized distribution area like Delhi, but we've not really seen that take off in a big way. So what do you see have been the barriers so far to this? And do you feel it is because consumers aren't able to perceive that savings that they actually get from the use of energy efficient appliances? So maybe your thoughts on this, Sangeeta. Sangeeta, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you very much, Karthik. So coming to, the perception of consumers and also, why aren't they taking up these appliances? I just want to first mention how, on awareness and, nudging customers towards adoption of energy efficiency, I mean, you have to make end-use energy consumption visible. It has to be visible at a more granular level and in a more timely fashion. And to that effect, I mean, ESL's program on smart meters is also good, though of course it was primarily aimed at improving billing. But definitely, if you can make, with the smart meter rollout and, if you can make end-use energy consumption visible at a much more granular level and in a timely fashion, almost on a daily basis to consumers, they will, the interest will definitely be piqued if they see it going up and down. And a lot of people refer to the COVID bill shocks. People obviously were spending more time at home. Maybe residential consumption did go up. Maybe it's up, but they still got a bill shock because of the way the billing was done. Averaging estimates over the last few days. But if they had that, sort of, if they were able to see on a daily basis really how much they're using, it would nudge their behavior for sure. I mean, in the same way that, your telecom service providers apps tell you, I mean, at any instant across all my devices, I can find out what my usage is, what my bill is likely to be. So I think the first step is, making energy end use consumption visible. It's not technically complex. It should be doable. And states are the right people to do it, right? In terms of DISCOMs, SDAs, and CERCs, they're all at state. And each of those organizations, definitely DISCOMs and SDAs, will benefit also from that level of data that they get. So I definitely feel if you make energy end use visible, you can have it in a very fancy app, you can have it even in a very small app or even by SMS, but that's important. Coming to your point on the perception of, these energy efficient appliances, I do want to focus a little bit on the fans, because in your study, you said only 8% said are aware of star labeled fans. And, whereas so many, 2/3 of the stock, of lighting is LED. So interestingly, if you look at, last year we did a study on super efficient appliances and energy access in rural areas. So if you look at people who are sort of in weak grid or off grid areas, they actually spend on that brushless DC fan, because otherwise, you want to limit the solar PV that you have, because that's also expensive, right? So actually they sort of invest in a BLDC fan. Whereas people who have grid supply, I mean, if a BLDC fan is twice the cost of a regular or even a 5-star fan, I mean, even if you go to Amazon.in, right? I mean, it's the cheapest you can get, but it's still twice the cost. I mean, people will definitely think twice, sort of buying that. But my view on, some very basic things like fans, I know ESL is looking at the and procurement and then directly for the consumer. But I think something like you could also probably look at slightly more upstream programs where, a BLDC motor is used in many appliances. It can be used in many appliances, small appliances in the home. And I think it's worth looking if that, the BLDC motor itself and the associated circuitry is really the cost that's driving up, what's driving up the cost really. You could look at a program for that, which, is given to the MSMEs or the companies that manufacture these, and see if they can somehow bring down the price of BLDC fans. So I definitely think looking at that too is important. States will look at on-bill financing. It was good to hear that there's a utility-driven DSM program that Mr. Garnaik at ESL is trying to pursue in 3 states. Because from the state index, we find, a lot of the DSM programs, about 10 states have only mentioned it in the latest state index, but in the non-AG DSM, it's primarily in municipal buildings or in other public buildings. A little bit is towards sort of village LED campaigns, but very much on lighting still and not so much on fans. So that would be interesting to see for sure.
Okay, great. The point that you made about the, going a little upstream, I think takes us to Nairika here. So Nairika is actually the executive director at Godrej and Boyce Manufacturing Company. It is the manufacturing arm of Godrej, the company that we know, which is about 150 years old now. And she leads their digital strategy, brand, legal, and mergers and acquisitions part for GNB and its subsidiaries. And she drives a company-wide strategy on new digital interventions through online platforms and ecosystems to improve customer experience and foster collaboration, innovation, and enhance data-driven decision making. Nairika, thanks for taking the time to come over here. So one of the things that I wanted to sort of really touch upon here was, what exactly is Godrej and Boyce doing in order to ensure that you're able to tap into this latent demand for energy efficient appliances that is there in the economy, right? But which is seemingly sort of outside of the price point of many consumers. So she mentioned, for instance, Sangeeta, about brushless DC motors and how you can make them cheaper. So is there something that Godrej Boys is really thinking of to take this to the next level?
Yeah, thank you, Karthik, and I'd like to congratulate the CEW team on the fantastic report and the very insightful findings. I think there is a huge demand in India for appliances, and as we are, the penetration is quite low. But I think financial incentives and other interventions are extremely important for creating any kind of behavioral change amongst consumers. And, even though, ESL has been innovating to work with Dishcoms to replace air conditioners in government offices and places like this, I think schemes like this, if done, in conjunction with manufacturers and bundled with tax incentives on a regional or national level, will really help to drive adoption of energy efficient appliances. And also because, ACESS, for instance, has only got about 4.5% penetration compared to other Asian countries. So we have a long way to go. But the fact is that the sort of demand is rising so rapidly that, the number of ACs projected to rise to 31% by 2030, and, 2/3 of households likely to own ACs. So that's a huge potential as well as a huge burden on the planet. So I think in addition to mandatory labeling and the concerted efforts by government and industry to work together to spread awareness amongst consumers, both urban and rural, to be able to capture energy efficient appliances, I think the important aspect is the whole price equation, the price value equation. And I'd like to share, an experience of 5 years ago where we introduced an appliance called Chotu Cool, which was basically a small format chiller that you can use to cool things to 8 to 10 degrees using a 12-volt battery and thermoelectric energy rather than the traditional compressor technology. But despite our best efforts to make it a success, even though the product addressed a lot of pain points of rural customers, who were aspirational to enter the refrigeration market, the point is, marketers call it the nano effect. But even though products are cheaper and more accessible, ultimately they need to meet a consumer's aspirations regardless of the utility. So I think, Godrej has been, trying to incentivize, whether it's, through low EMI schemes to promote affordability and adoption, and also drive awareness, from trade partners to store advisors to end customers. But at the end of the day, the price becomes a deterrent. So as products rise in energy efficiency, that's directly proportional to the price, and that becomes a big deterrent. So I think it's a consolidated drive at both industry as well as government level to basically drive this behavioral change, because I don't think industry can do it alone.
Right. That's so one of the things. So you mentioned, you brought in the Chotu Cool, Narika, and did not really see the light of day in some sense, in the way it's scaled up. But another interesting experiment, the Global Cooling Prize that Godrej is now, part of, is designed to sort of be a change in the way we think about conventional cooling, right? Not necessarily for a specific segment which does not have access to conventional cooling. This is about changing conventional cooling itself. Do you feel there is, with Godrej being part of it, do you feel that, this can truly change the way India consumes energy in cooling, houses and buildings? And what do you feel are the prospects that Godrej is seeing going into the competition, which I think I think is the results of maybe next year. Is that when it concludes?
Yeah.
So your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think it's a matter of huge national pride that the share of households that are using electricity has risen from 26% in 1980 to almost 96% this year. And energy efficiency has been a very, very sort of core theme for the appliance industry and for Godrej. So we have always focused on, looking at sustainable materials. We've looked at refrigerants, insulation materials, which are very core to the whole price equation. And, long before government had mandated, we had these in our products. So, and as recently, as you mentioned, we were one of the 8 finalists and the only Indian appliance company to be finalists in the Global Cooling Prize. And our team had done a technology prototype, which reduces the energy consumption of ACs by almost 80%. And using an evaporative cooling based technology and a different refrigerant that has a very low carbon footprint. And we expect that, this will deliver a very powerful cooling impact, but, 5 times less impact on the environment. And this is a great example of incentivizing research and production of products for higher efficiency. And, also looking at, the seamless way in which government and industry have worked to introduce and to spread awareness on the mandatory, energy rating systems. The gradual tightening of these standards now are at par with the developing world. And I'd especially like to congratulate EESL for the great proactive role that you've played in reimagining the way that electricity is used in our country and pushing innovative schemes to help lower power consumption by driving sustainable gadgets and incentivizing replacements. But there's a dichotomy here, because as energy ratings tighten and have tightened quite rapidly, the costs have substantially risen. And, even though the 5-star, 4-star ACs are the most energy efficient, consumers prefer the 2-star, 3-star from, a price perspective. And despite the strong push by government and industry to make consumers understand the economics of running, and energy savings, total cost of ownership, consumers continue to be price conscious, and especially large ticket items. The immediate upfront cost is much more important than the long-term energy savings. At least that's what we have experienced in the market. And even offering schemes and improving the 5-star rating, much more needs to be done on the whole consumer perception, awareness, and so we have to do it through a more concerted campaign, both on the communication side, but more importantly on taxes and other financial incentives. And maybe we can take a cue from electrical vehicles, and how by providing incentives on batteries and other benefits, the government and automakers have created a market by incentivizing its importance in society. So a similar approach could be used for energy efficient appliances as well in the country, and hopefully that would substantially increase adoption.
Right. Thank you, Narika. And I think, you talked about, incentivizing consumers and, and getting them to buy into it. And I think that's a good segue to bring in Ms. Rama Bijapurkar. Thank you, Ms. Rama. I know, it's taken a while to sort of get to you, and to our participants and listeners around, Ms. Rama, of course, is not the common face in discussions in energy circles, because energy is not her mainstay, but she's a thought leader on market strategy and consumer behavior, and a commentator on social and cultural change in India. She's a co-founder of a think tank by the name People Research on India's Consumer Economy, which is going to be based out of IIM Udaipur soon. and she's also a professor of management practice in the Indian Institute of Ahmedabad. And incidentally, she's been on the board of directors of several Indian companies, of which I think Godrej is also one of them. America, I found that out in a conversation that I had with Ms. Bijapurkar just earlier today afternoon. So Ms. Bijapurkar, so one of the questions that I have for you is this, right? We talked about, how do we nudge consumers to basically buy more efficient appliances? And I think you push back in a big way on this meaning of how a consumer understands efficiency itself. So maybe if you could just maybe expound on what do you think are the barriers in the way consumers see energy efficiency and how they buy into it. It would give us an insight into how we can maybe push these products more and make them more acceptable in the mainstream. You're on mute, Ms. Bijapurkar.
Yeah, hi. Well, I thought it was an absolutely extraordinary conversation so far, so I didn't mind being the fly on the wall, and I've learned a lot. Regretfully, I was not on the NIRECA's board, but on the board of Godrej Consumer, which has nothing to do with energy efficiency. It's about taking baths and coloring hair and all that other stuff. So yeah, I just want to make firstly one point. I always feel that the government of India is not our marketing director and should not be so. So I think we have to get successful on our own if we believe we're delivering value to the consumer. The Indian, all consumers, and I'm going to talk about Consumer India because that is what we're discussing now. I think Consumer India has no religion about I want to buy this or I want to buy that. Like consumers everywhere, they want to buy that which gives them the maximum value. Value is benefit minus cost. They have an algorithm in their heads. They will process your benefit and your cost and as compared to the benefit and the cost of the alternative and say paisa vasool ki nahi vasool. Right? So a very poor person will say, I have 2 pay channels in my house because I have, let me give you a more complex example. I have a mother-in-law who has to stay at home and cook dinner while I come and do beautician work late at night for you women who will pay me a price premium. So, they are pretty sophisticated in terms of how they process value. Similarly, as far as energy efficient is concerned, if you're telling consumers that this will get the job done and your electricity bills will be lower, and that's fine. I don't think anybody will say no. If you say that this is going to get the job done and your bills will be lower, and I'm not responsible if your bills are not lower, I don't know where the rating system came out of, and I am not, and by the way, you're going to have to pay double for the joy of, or 1.5 times for the joy of an energy efficient system. I think what you're doing, even in business, if you made that offer to the supply side as a bank, I think there are too many unknowns, and by the time you arrive at a risk-weighted number, and consumers are extremely good at risk-weighted algorithms, they will say, well, maybe, maybe not. If you give them, there's no frills is another story forever, which is that if you decide that tumhare auqat ke liye yahi theek hai, and sometimes it doesn't even fulfill what they actually use it for, then you haven't understood their value right. So let me give you the example of telecom. I think the entire country is now obsessed, will not live without a mobile phone. I might sort of skip a little bit on the vegetables, but I need to do my recharge because there is real value being delivered. I think a lot of points have been covered so far, all of which are extremely valid. And I think we must never forget that we're a poor country. At the end of the day, we put out, my colleague, Dr. Shukla, who runs our ISEPP surveys. By the way, we do 60,000 consumers and get income data because it's shocking this country runs without income data. So there's no income data in the public domain of any serious kind. There's claimed income data, but there's no real income data. So if you actually look at income data, it is true that for still a large section of India, in spite of us being the 5th largest economy, we are a large economy of lots and lots of very modest income people. Consumers will tell you, "Mere ko chaurasta pe nilam karne se bhi paise nahi hai, iske upar jaane ke liye." In good times of the economy, we will stretch for more and take a punt that our incomes will increase. In bad times, we will settle for less. We see it with two-wheelers. Two-wheeler penetration is phenomenal because it's a productivity tool. So similarly, I think we just have to find where is the value as far as consumers are concerned and benefit minus cost. The two-wheeler industry created value through what is called 65 kilometers per liter. Uske niche chalta nahi hai. You can raise your power, you can do what you want, but you have a very small sort of amount of play in terms of how low you can go. So if you do deliver value to consumers, consumers are extremely happy buying and paying for it to the extent that they can pay for it. It's a classic question, is there fortune at the bottom of the pyramid? There is, because 30% of our consumption comes from our lower income. Do we know how to get our hands on it? That's where you need innovation and you need the supply side to really kick in. The last point I want to make is there's no instant karma. It's not, oh, I launched this low cost thing and by the way, I haven't made enough money on it. Your net margins will take time to come. I think we discovered it on the FMCG side as well. We were in denial over the possibility of doing it, but it takes you about a good 8-10 years by the time you start to make money on it. I think the thing with the telcos is that the whole ecosystem came together. We hope it will come together for agriculture now. So the reason e-commerce works is because if you walk on the pavement, you will break your foot because there are so many potholes. We have the lowest data rates in the world. Thank you, China, for giving us smartphones. We're not telling the consumer that, oh, you're poor, you can't get a camera, you can't get data, you can't get this, you can't get that. So when you get the stars aligned through a lot of hard work and serendipity, I think markets explode. And that should be the big vision we should be going after.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say is that, it's really the income that's constraining perhaps the purchase of some of these goods, and perhaps the fact that, consumers aren't quite sold on the fact that when you do buy an energy efficient appliance, it does deliver the value that it promises to. And I think maybe I'll
and on the money, just to interrupt you, I'm not saying all consumers are poor. As you know, India lives over 4 centuries and over 4 economies. So we have more air-conditioned cars than we have air conditioners at home. That's telling you something. Yeah,
right. Right, absolutely. So Sangeeta, I wanted to sort of come to you at this point and ask, when you look at options, right, for delivering more efficiency, specifically in cooling, right? What do you see the role of non-conventional approaches like building envelope, addressing the building envelope itself? I know that ACCESS as an organization, of course, does work on building energy efficiency, because the solutions we're really talking about here are more efficient ACs, and other sort of tinkering around, so to say. Whereas that really big ticket item, which is how do you build better, is not really the focus. I know one of the global cooling prices, of course, talks about, I think, building retrofits as well. But what is your view about what that can deliver for India, Sangeeta?
I mean, definitely through better building design, but mind you, we're talking here now about a residential consumer also, right? I mean, we already have ECBC out for commercial buildings, and even if you look at energy conservation awards and green building ratings, I mean, obviously commercial buildings see that value, and they see that because electricity bills or energy bills is a large cost for them, so they see it. So when you come to consumers, I'll come to the building envelope part a little bit, but I feel for the residential consumer, I do want to come back to my point on residential consumers knowing how much they spend on energy, right? And seeing when they spend that electricity, when they use that, when is the demand higher? And I think that can nudge behavior change on simple things like, the thermostat setting on your AC, make it a little higher because you can manage with that. You can switch your AC to sleep mode after some time. You can try mixed mode cooling. So definitely those are things which a residential consumer can start looking at as soon as they know the data, right? And there are people already living in buildings, whether they own it or they rent it. And these are things you can do whether you own the building or you rent a place, right? And similarly, that same thing could help influence their purchase, provided, as Ms. Rama said, that they're convinced they're getting value for it, right? I know it's going to lower my bills. When it comes to buildings, definitely. I mean, if you, the new Eco Niwas Samhita, which is a code that they're trying to come out for residential buildings, I mean, that there are already about 8 or 9 states just working through it. It's not yet out notified, I know, even by B, but there are already a few states working on it. But it's a question of how do you engage a residential consumer, right? Because most people will buy an apartment, I'm sure, right? Very few have bespoke kind of houses that they design by themselves. So I think it is a question of at state level, the SDAs and the urban development departments working very closely with builders who are working on residential buildings upfront so that they bring in these codes just like they did with rainwater harvesting. At one time, rainwater harvesting was a nice to have. And then in no time, it became part of the building code and, people adopted it. So here too, I it is important, but you can't expect a residential consumer to do it on their own. They're not going to go to a builder and say, okay, now tell me all this, because you're trying to get your loan, you're trying to do so many things, right, when you buy an apartment.
Right.
But it's definitely something that SDAs and UDDs can push, and they can already start doing that using the Eco-Niva Samhita draft that's already out. Yeah.
Okay, right. Shantanu, so maybe at this point, I want to turn to you. So, we've spoken, of course, about, consumers, what is the nudge that's needed? And, and you've been working on, tariffs and consumer prices for electricity itself. Do you feel that the way electricity is priced for residential energy consumers today in the country, is that a deterrent to maybe the pursuit of energy efficiency at some level? Because, when we talk about consumer rights, there are, there is, of course, the expectation that the DISCOM will do what is needed to satisfy you. But at the end of the day, if the service levels are poor, and if what you're paying for electricity is also, not commensurate to the quality that you want, right? You'd rather just go on to other options, right? The example that Arunabha gave, the reason why Arunabha is on a DG set is because he's able to perhaps afford the 12 rupees a unit that DG set gives. And he doesn't mind that, the Gurgaon DISCOM doesn't supply to him electricity that it would otherwise give at 6 rupees, right? So do you think electricity tariffs can really help in changing the perception around energy efficiency, especially in the middle and upper middle income groups?
See, here again, consumers is not a very homogeneous sector. There are different requirements, different expectations in terms of quality and a price that people are willing to pay for that. For just the example that you gave, where even 5 minutes interruption a day can make a huge difference, and people may be willing to invest few thousand rupees in inverter. But there is another segment of the society where, yeah, probably if you get electricity supply for only 20 hours, but more important issue is to have much cheaper electricity tariff. And this sort of inequity is reflected also in the survey results that you have captured. For poor segment, your report says that about 15 to 18% of income or total expenditure goes in electricity bill or energy towards energy, whereas for rich people it is just about 3%. So it really shows that there needs to be different kind of tariff structure. And I don't think it's just a issue of tariff which is hampering adoption of energy efficiency or efficient appliances in the country. Along with tariff, we also need a significant large-scale program, policy push and regulatory approach, which can provide the kind of value proposition that consumers are looking at. Just one example is this, case of super efficient fans. The BE has been working on it for about a decade or so, I think, to really make these BLDC fans more affordable and giving subsidy rather than at the end consumer or electricity tariff route. Giving subsidy upfront to the manufacturer can really have multiplier effect in terms of making these fans much more affordable. So we need innovation, we need different kind of policy regulatory approaches to actually make more efficient appliances affordable for consumers, and that is the way to provide more value proposition for consumers.
Right. I mean, that is, again, going back to the government sort of really putting that incentive in there, and tough decision to ask of government of India given the circumstances. Ms. Bijapurkar,
But Karthik, I just want to add to that. The total amount of financial resources required for these kind of interventions are very limited in that sense. So I don't think it's a question of availability of financial resources. It's a question of having that vision that we want to build much more efficient appliance sector, and not just targeted towards high-end consumers, but also for bottom of the pyramid consumers, where the value of lower electricity bill is far greater. So it's a sort of policy priority issue, I would say, rather than resource availability issue. Yeah.
Fair enough, Shantanu. That's a great point to make. Ms. Bijapurkar, I just thought I'd come to you maybe for one closing comment from you on this. So you talked about, consumers seeing value, and if in the case of a productive, appliance or a device, right, there is that instant willingness to maybe put the money down, even if it's an expensive one. So in the case of energy efficiency for appliances, right, so what do you think will be really needed? Of course, demonstrating it is one thing, but especially given the downturn that we're seeing and the income shocks, right? So in order to sort of bolster the purchase of appliances that could sort of maybe offset, higher energy prices going forward and whatnot, what do you think really is needed on the part of entities like EESL or distribution companies to showcase to consumers that this is worth investing in? So how do you think they can capture the consumer's mindset?
Let's just desegregate all these points. First and foremost, if the world has gone to hell, to meet targets for appliance companies is really a non-issue. Take a dead year, take a down year, let's get on with it. If you look at how India earns, let's face it, 40% of India, 39% in rural and about 30 something in urban are casual laborers and street vendors, okay? Every day they show up and they say is there work or is there no work? All right, so we know that there is serious trouble. We also know that nobody in India gets a regular salary and has a regular job. The number's 5%. If you get one, that's good. I don't. So I mean, it's really there. So I think that this is really not the time to talk about sort of selling more gadgets, broadly speaking. I think 50%, there are many people who, the way India's economy works is that if you jumpstart investment, then the dhaba guy, the car cleaner, the truck owner, the truck driver, the chotu at the petrol bunk, everybody makes money. So we take proportionate haircuts. We go up proportionately, we come down proportionately. So there is the second question. So right now, I think the spirit is willing for everybody. The flesh is weak. When incomes come back up, as far as the top 20% of India is concerned, which is the so-called middle class, they have about 90% of India's surplus income. So it's not that they don't have money. You will see auto sales go up. You already are seeing it. So, I mean, I think you will see air conditioner sales going up and so on. So the other question is that what will it take to make people pay? Like, I think I said to you that energy efficient, I've never heard any consumer use that word. What will they pay? What will make them pay for things that lower your electricity bill, even if they cost a little more? Right? 2% of income, even of the lowest income, is spent on electricity. 5% in urban areas is spent of income is spent on electricity. So, and nobody likes opening their bills. So I think what needs to be done as far as consumers are concerned is, again, I agree completely with the segmented approach. It's horses for courses. There are people who in good times who are poor will buy a geyser because it gives you garam pani for the brand new baby in the household, and they will use it and use it sparingly. I think optimizing energy is something consumers do. LPG has gone to practically every home, but not everybody uses LPG for everything. So industry has got to decide that I can be the market leader if I can lower cost. 60 kilometers per liter, chant the mantra after me. If I can have an air conditioner that warms me in the winter like car air conditioners do and cools me in the summer, and if I can work with the processing in people's heads, what is the benefit that I get minus what is the cost, I think you still have it. There are certain segments for whom you got to get the entry price lower. It's not lower for rubbish. It's think cell phones. So I'm saying if we can just seriously cut out the smoking dope and look at every industry where things have succeeded, I think we have enough formulae that are already available. You can also do it by fatwa, which is what they do on the BS6 norms, et cetera, and cause chaos. That also is not acceptable to industry. So you have fatwa, you have persuasion, you have learning from other industries. In some cases, you're going to have to keep the costs low for entry levels. On the other hand, a company can come in and say, okay, I'm going to give you the entire appliance. You just pay me a certain EMI every month, and I will give you X% rebate on your electricity bill. That's also possible. Okay, so I think we already are at a discounted, because I certainly know in Maharashtra, the Maharashtra electricity regulator is giving you differential rates of payment depending on what your bills are. So I think that is a done deal. So nice. I think it comes back to, if the market is important enough for you, innovate. If you want to dominate and scale doesn't come from anybody not losing money on it. Right? Scale, it's like the retail business. You as long as your gross margins are positive, the more you sell, you will not lose more. Your gross margins are positive and your net margins are negative. Suck it up, play for the long haul if you're a big boy.
Got it.
You're not, then let's wait and see that it happens. It is what it is.
Right. I'm definitely going to have to replay some of the recording to absorb a lot of the messages that Ms. Bijapurkar has given us. So that was indeed a true lecture from Professor at IIM Ahmedabad. So thank you, Ms. Bijapurkar, for making those. And I think, Mr. Garnayak, there's a point that Ms. Bijapurkar has made that maybe I want to sort of pick your brains on. So she talked about a very interesting model, right? I mean, in the conversation that I had with her, she talked about how today, maybe an urban club delivering an air conditioner service to you, right? And saying that, well, you know what, I will sell this service to you and ensure that, this is going to be the bill that you pay, is perhaps the model that we need to push energy efficient appliances, because ultimately that's where the true, test of the delivery is. So is ESL maybe looking at, models outside of, or do you think that's a potential model that maybe needs to be looked at, right? Where it's not just the product that you're selling, but maybe the service of, okay, I will guarantee this and I'll ensure that, the servicing for this device and everything else comes packaged along with it, so that, you're not left chasing after, a vendor like Daikin. She was telling me about her terrible experience with it. Of course, don't want a lawsuit against me for bringing their name here, but, she
like
said,
me a lawsuit against me.
right. So for how, you bought a very efficient appliance, but at the end of the day, because, it went out of warranty period and everything else, right? You're basically stuck with, a product that's not working. So your thoughts, Mr. Garnaik, on alternative ways of energy efficiency?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I fully agree with the point that yes, service factors or service level engage arrangements, terms and conditions, those play a very, very important role apart from the the equipment itself, because that actually brings the confidence level among of the people. The satisfaction does not only be defined how much energy he's getting or she's going to save. It actually whether she's confident, having a feel good factor in having that appliance, that is very, very important. For example, if you are dealing with something, say giving deploying these appliances after that particular order is placed by a consumer, and if we say that this will be delivered in 72 hours time, then probably that clock starts from that. And after that, the warranties, the complaint handling systems, so on and so forth, all comes into the picture. And typically as a energy service company like us, we put that responsibility back to back with the vendors. So now the point here is that to actually create that confidence level among the consumers, how coherently we are working with the vendors to ensure, to adhere to their terms and conditions as per the contractual agreement is the very important thing. We have been successful to a certain extent, but there is a lot to work on this kind of thing. The point what you people are, the speakers are making it here is that the quantification or the quantified energy saving, which is tangible, which is visible to the consumer. So that actually gives another level of satisfaction because it directly impacts to his pocket, his money is paying to this. But as we see, we have actually, and that is precisely the ESCO concept, the energy servicing company worldwide. It is called as a guaranteed saving approach. So, but the guaranteed saving approach has its own difficulties because you must have to have a monitoring protocol. There are certain parameters which will impact those monitoring factors and so on and so forth. So those things are unfortunately not available in India or not established in India. So that is why the ESCO business, ESCO market in India has not taken a leapfrog approach if we see it in the past. What ESL actually tried to do, then whether we want to develop those kind of things, protocols, and then go for energy efficiency, capturing the energy efficiency market, or let's redefine the ESCO thing and have this market established, then we'll go to the next level of quantified energy saving and all these things. So that is why our approach was based on the deemed saving approach, and which we have been successful in convincing to the people. But as I say, this is not helpful or not suitable for all kind of projects. Probably when it comes to a high-end products like air conditioner, even in the ceiling fan, people want to know what is the exact saving, what they are getting. So that probably can be documented, can be demonstrated with some kind of good pilots, and that can be made visible or made available to the people. It may not be that every appliances can be monitored what is the energy saving it is giving, but probably it can be showcased in a proper way, scientific way, and logically. Then only it is possible. We have our other programs like some of the major programs in the combined heat and power, the tri-generation. Those are the projects which are turnkey kind of thing. Even chiller replacement program, what we are doing, there we are ensuring a guaranteed energy saving. But when it comes out to the appliances which are being used in the common consumers, probably we have to work more intensely how to define that measuring protocol. And then only probably we will be able to do that. So we are working into that direction, but it will take some time to go into a guaranteed saving mode.
Right. Let's hope that, many more ESLs spin-off, many more ESCO spin-off, on the success of what you're proposing here, Mr. Garnaik. Nirika, I'll turn to you, for your sort of closing comment. I think one of the things that we've found is that, there's this large base of suppliers of, whether it's fans, we talked about fans, of unbranded fans. One of our colleagues is, fathers actually is in the business of manufacturing, putting together fans actually, right? And, a lot of them obviously feel that, the consumer is very price sensitive, and for them to invest the needed amount to sort of, bring up their manufacturing process is a bit of a tough ask. So do you feel Godrej is, it might be a good option for Godrej to maybe consider working their way up that value chain, or rather, to see, how can you sort of really, work with, the smallest of players, who have phenomenal reach in the way they sort of market their product to all parts of the country, right? But then they benefit from maybe the technology that you guys can bring in here and the scale that you can provide, right? So, and I think this is the point that Sangeeta also alluded to. Can Godrej become the supplier, so to say, of some of those building blocks that can then actually, really, open up the market for many smaller manufacturers? Your thoughts on this, Narika?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've tried to look at many different ways of approaching consumers and really looking at the whole sustainability agenda. But I think the also in terms of the total in the whole ownership cycle now, whether it's for rural markets, a lot of appliances are refurbished and sold to the rural market. So can we also make those appliances more energy efficient before they're resold? Or, can collection of e-waste, be an important way to educate new users and consumers about energy efficient products? So I think definitely we have to think laterally, what are the ways in which, we can all work together to be able to make these appliances affordable, and be able to enable consumers to really understand, the cost savings over the life cycle, and do it through different interventions, because I think that at the end of the day is the key stumbling block on making the materials which go into appliances affordable, cheaper, and yeah,
absolutely. And and to Sangeeta and Shantanu, I have one final sort of closing question, which is, I'll pose the same question to both of you. Sangeeta, you made the point that, measuring this and showing the savings to the consumer is very important. Shantanu, I know Prayas is doing this eMark initiative, which is really about, measuring what consumers do. You guys have a specific product that monitors, I think, refrigerator consumption, for instance, right? So perhaps, you're even trying an experiment where you're communicating to consumers, this is what your consumption of the refrigerator is. So to what extent do you feel, what do you think are the options that are available, given, how discoms work and how bills are generated and the technology that currently exists? Sangeeta, what do you think are the options that are available to actually communicate savings to consumers, given what we have? I mean, I know there are different technologies that can deliver it, but given what we have currently, how do you think we can do it better?
So I think, if you're looking at almost sub-metering level, how do I know that this refrigerator or this fan actually is consuming less? I mean, that, of course, you can look at the very complex technology where you look at these time series kind of smart meter signals and things like that. That is a little bit more difficult to do. But to start with, I said, today also discoms and, can work to provide their consumer more timely information on a daily basis. And what I'm trying to say is, even something like that, you will at least start observing where, you suddenly consume more. I mean, I know that, sometimes say, okay, how come this month I consume so much more, but I see it only at the end of the month. Then you're trying to figure out, okay, why did that happen? So at least to start with, right? I mean, then this is how everybody refers to the telecom companies, but that's exactly how telecom changed, right? Initially, they give you not at a very granular level. And over time, literally at any instant, how many bytes of data you've used or gigabytes of data you've used. So I think without getting immediately thinking of the most complex way to do it, discoms can certainly give more timely information about the usage of electricity by consumers, especially where there are smart meters. I mean, they've even the new electricity rules on the rights of consumers. They have a lot on, quality of supply and connections, and they have something on billing and payments, and they have a small section called creating awareness. And within that, they've squeezed the word energy efficiency. But one missing thing is, a customer really has the right to that data, because they talk a lot about smart meters, prepaid smart meters. The customer has a right to know that data, and they can get it if you have a smart meter, they can get it on a daily basis. And, not even looking at a customer who is at the lower income segment, somebody who has a prepaid meter, I think they are definitely entitled to get usage on, how much have I used so far and am I nearing my limit. So I think the technology is already out there. You don't have to think of the most fancy kind of energy management solution. It's there to at least show it lump sum on a day-by-day basis. I just want to add, though, that I feel time of day tariff and those kind of programs also help, right? Because then consumers can manage demand. And I know there are about 5 states that already have it for residential consumers. I think in Kerala and West Bengal, it's mandatory for about 500 units per month. And in 3 other states, Delhi, Haryana, and AP, it's kind of. So I definitely feel TOD can also help in people managing demand, and then they will see that, okay, I better use a certain device in a different way at this time, kind of.
Okay. And Shantanu, so have you guys tried an experiment already with what you've measured from eMark and seen whether consumers actually respond to this provision of information, or is that too early days for you to comment on?
Yeah, I think the eMark objective was, and it's completely different. It's not in terms of informing individual consumers or individual households. It's more to inform research community and to get more insights into consumers' electricity consumption pattern and load pattern. So I think it's a different objective. But I would like to share one important thing. When we did some consumer surveys over the last decade or so, one thing that comes out very strongly again and again, and that may be surprise for many of us, is that still even now consumers have very significant trust in terms of what the utility, especially government discoms, say or what they claim. When it comes to about savings potential, about the kind of energy efficient appliances that can deliver energy service at lower cost, I think discoms communication does play a very important role, and that's where discoms can contribute in terms of identifying different brands, different models, actually undertaking testing independently and sharing those independent testing results with their consumers. That can play a significant confidence building measure for consumers, because there are 2 primary decision support systems for consumers. One is what the neighbor says or what the electrician is saying in terms of which appliance is good, etc., and what the distribution company is saying. So I think that trust based relationship can be leveraged, I would say, to really create a strong confidence and nudge for consumers to go for energy efficient appliances. So that's the role that discoms can play.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. I think we're 4 minutes over time, so I'm going to sort of maybe try and bring this to a close. No point summarizing, but I think we try to, of course, focus the discussion really on how energy efficiency can play a big role. We've learned a lot from the likes of Ms. Bijapurkar, who brings a completely different perspective to this entire debate. To, of course, Nairika, Mr. Garnaik, Shantanu, and Sangeeta. Thank you for, first of all, agreeing to be on this panel, and some of you at very short notice as well. We really appreciate the insights that you've brought. I'd like to thank also, of course, all the people that have stuck on to a 2-hour-long session, and who've sort of come with us through till the end, and every one of the members of the India Residential Energy Consumption Survey team, right? Not just in the power sector team, but everyone at CEW who helped put together the survey, all our reviewers and people who helped us with giving comments on the early drafts of the survey instrument, the reviewers. Thank you, everyone, and special thanks to, of course, the Initiative for Sustainable Energy Policy at Johns Hopkins University, who are our partners in this survey. And finally, of course, I'd like to thank the MacArthur Foundation, who've generously supported this initiative, without which we definitely would not have been able to carry out this exercise of interviewing up to 15,000 people in the country. Thanks, everyone. And finally, maybe Arunabha, did you want to close out with any words?
First of all, many thanks, Karthik, for that stimulating panel discussion. I got in while this was going on, and this is a credit to all of you and the panelists. I got an email from someone participating in this, someone listening in on this session, and she wrote, "I feel fortunate to be part of your online meeting today. The panelists are really great. Thank you for a very worthwhile afternoon." I think worthwhile is the right word, because of the candor and the honesty with which everyone has spoken, whether it's the additional secretary, Mr. Panda, and of course, all of you. So I want to thank you particularly for making this afternoon worthwhile for all of us. Um, I just wanted to close by reflecting on one thing, and I talked about this a year ago in terms of air pollution, but it matters even now in regards to energy and electricity, is that we often think of the consumer or the citizen as somebody else, and and that we have to solve for them, and we talk and act as the economic agents, right? Whether it's from I'm an economic agent in my work as an analyst, or Nirika as an economic agent in her work as an industrialist. But we seldom realize that we are also the citizen. So when the economic agent starts thinking like the citizen, I think a lot of the things could begin to unfold. And two things that came out to me, I mean, there are many, many issues that have been brought to light, but for future research, and we would love to collaborate with many of you on this panel, two things. One is, what kind of information makes sense for the consumer, the citizen, and not for the economic agent, right? The economic agent, the analyst can come up with graphs, and the industrialist can come up with, technology. But what kind of information makes sense when we put on the hats of being the citizen? And the second, and this is and Sangeeta, Shantanu, both of you, and of course, Mr. Garnaik also raised this. And the second point is something that both Rama and Nirika raised a lot, is what kind of incentives will get us to respond to that information as citizens, right? And what we think might work might not be the same as kind of maybe many different ways in which nudging behavior works. And we need to not just talk about this in abstract, but actually experiment with this at scale. Experiment with different forms of information sharing, and run maybe randomized control trials or something like that, and work with different forms of incentive structures, whether it's tax and subsidy, or whether it's amortizing the cost of the lifetime of a product or service, or something else, right? And both those to me are extremely exciting, because then I am volunteering myself as guinea pig number one. So once again, thank you for making this a very, very worthwhile exercise for us. Thanks to Shalu for leading the research. Thanks to Karthik for shepherding the team. And thanks to all of you for guiding us.
Thank you, everyone. Really
Thank you,
appreciate your
everyone.
time.
Thank you. It was pleasure joining
Thank
this
you.
discussion. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.